U.S. Senate now, but I can tell you right now, I would be hard-pressed to see any of the senators from the other states decide to support the idea of giving California 2 more senators by breaking off and creating Jefferson, even if it's a conservative state, over the objections of Feinstein and Boxer, who are current senators. And that's the lay of land that we have. The history books tell us as far back as 1911, the idea of splitting California with the power and control shifting to the south, isn't going to happen. So to me, I think the Declaration, doesn't serve our intentions well. If we were acting on a motion to enter into a collaboration with the other counties and with the people throughout the North State to put together a federal lawsuit and pursue Reynolds versus Sims and go directly to court, it's like monopoly. Do not go to jail. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Let's just go right for the issue that's there. Now that is something that I think is new and creative and has not really been at the heart of a lot of the movements in the past, and maybe why the other movements in the past failed to achieve any success. But I think that's where it is. When we talk about cause and standing, and the counties having standing, well, I can tell you, the stories you guys have all regaled in terms of your testimony, is par for the coast. We've got enough standing here, to fuel numerous federal lawsuits. So it's not a question of having to go out and invent the wheel. And I think, as Mark has pointed out, and I appreciate his input. He called me yesterday. We had a long conversation on the phone. And what they did in Wyoming and what they did with Tulare Water in terms of adjusting the representation, in terms of basically negating the effects of Reynolds versus Sims in those areas, gives us plenty of standing and opportunity. I think you have a greater chance of convincing 5 justices on the U.S. Supreme Court to restore the checks and balances that the Founding Fathers envisioned that we basically saw implemented from 1930 to 1965 here in California than you'll ever have trying to convince, and I could use some choice expletives deleted to describe Sacramento or Washington. And I think that's where we need to kind of focus our efforts on. Beyond that, the other thing I want to share, and I appreciate the
work. does support it, and this is her last term, so.
Hey, you're out of order back there.
Mr. Chairman, if I could have the floor. Anyway, dealing with the financials, and I think it's important that we understand what we're doing and being smart about it. And I appreciate the information that was presented at our last meeting, and I've been out on the website. I've viewed all the videos, a lot of the videos that are there. But we got a major problem with our financial scenario, and I shared that with Mark yesterday, and he's obviously going to have to go back and work with his finance people. But inherent in the finances, it kind of shows how we're going to be X number of $1 billion. It takes $3 billion to operate the state, and we have all this money when you take everything in consideration. But it envisions utilizing basically the 88 cents on the dollar that we pay in terms of federal taxes. Now, if we were seceding from the Union and not being part of the United States of America, then I think there probably would be some merit because we'd be able to keep those dollars that we send to Washington. But the state of Jefferson proposal doesn't propose to do that. And so all the regulatory burdens and all the, you might say, mismanagement of our tax dollars by the federal government will be just the same whether we're in California or we're in Jefferson or in the 51st state or anything else. And when you back out the $7.7 billion those federal tax dollars that would theoretically return to California that are apportioned to the 20-some counties in the state of Jefferson, you take that out of the picture, instead of being, $3 million to the good, we're $4 million to the in the hole. So financially, it doesn't pencil out. And beyond that, a lot of these funds that we're talking about here that the federal government, they're spending on behalf of us and in terms of coming back with services and programs. I mean, there's an assembly of programs that are provided that really basically are underwritten by federal funding, whether the state does it or the county does it. And in this particular case, I mean, if you have any friend that's working for any of the federal agencies, I used one in my particular case as a neighbor and a good friend, and that's Jeff Fontana, who's the Public Information Officer for the BLM here locally, but he really is the PIO for the entire north section or district of BLM, which takes in pretty much everything we were talking about in the Jefferson State thing. And I know him through church and have known him for many years because of his involvement in the community. And I said, well, gee, Jeff, you're a liquid asset because, you know, the money that would be funding this is the money that pays for people like him and any other federal employee. About the only dollars that we get directly from the federal government that actually supports local services or even state services is our payment in lieu of taxes funds, the PILT monies that is apportioned to us based on acreage. It's not based on population. And the distribution of these federal dollars, that 88 cents that comes back out of every dollar paid to Washington, that comes back to California, is not distributed on a per capita basis anyway. The road funds, any of the federal aid for road construction and maintenance goes into a common pot, and 60% of that by the state constitution is apportioned and sent south of the Tehachapi's to the 10 southern counties, and the northern 48 counties have to scrap for the remaining 40%. So there is not an even distribution, even though when you take the template that I think your associates putting this together did, it really shows a certain amount of naivety when it comes to how the interrelationships of the finances that exist in our government services. But one thing is for certain, and I think this was one of the things that worked against us on the 51st state question 20 years ago, is that this idea that we're going to be able to sustain what we're doing and who's getting what in terms of allocating of resources, this kind of a split is going to require a major disruption in order to achieve the new direction that we all aspire for. And so I think it's going to require some more hard times before we see some good times. Now, back in the early 90s, we still had a resource-based economy somewhat intact. It was under a major fire. In the last 20 years, I would say our resource economy has been totally destroyed. So we're talking about having to rebuild that. And even if we had what we had in the 90s, if that split would have gone through, it would have taken us 10 to 20 years to really fully realize the economic benefit and how it would trickle down through our communities, and moving away from public employment as being the basis of our economy to one that's based upon jobs from using our natural resources. We're at a much more of a disadvantage now than today than we were then. And so, even though you have those clauses in the Constitution, you can't change contracts and stuff like that, we're going to see a lot of people hurt in the long run in a short time before we reach those better waters. And I think we have to understand that reality. Now, we talk about our founding fathers, and we like to use the rhetoric. We pledge our fortunes and our property and our lives to gain what it is. And that's a significant commitment to make. And I think that's what, the people here in the Jefferson State territory need to understand and appreciate. If we're willing to make those commitments to those hardships as a basis for that future prosperity, then I think we can get there. But it's not going to be an easy road. And anybody that sells you the idea that it's a piece of cake, it's no problem, it's just as simple as this. Take this piece of paper and divide it in half, and this is yours and that's ours, and life is good. Well, I guarantee you it's not simple as that. And I think when you get into the complexities of what it will mean, I think it would be difficult. What we want is representation. And I think the way we do that is overturning Reynolds versus Sims. And I think that should be our focus, not all this other stuff that we're talking about. How do we make that representation model work in California? And I got to tell you, it's been discouraging dealing with the state of California over the last 20 years since that effort. And they do give you blowback for having stepped out. I've felt a certain amount of repercussions because I had the audacity to speak in favor of that then. And in the last 20 years haven't always been easy in terms of dealing with the way you're treated by the rest of California. But that's okay. I go down to those same meetings and I let them know that I'm from Lassen County and I'm proud of where I'm from and who I represent. And even if we're a minority, we're there. But sum it up, I would just have to say, Mr. Chairman, that to me is the direction that we should take, and I'm all in favor of doing that because I think we have, for the first time, some hope, given the fact that those two court cases that modified Reynolds versus Sims is a precedent that can be used and exploited to our advantage. One last thing, and that is the issue of sovereignty. In the Declaration, it refers to us as the people of Lassen, but we're not the people of Lassen. Counties don't have sovereign status when it comes to negotiating. When the federal system was established, you had your states and then you had the federal government. The power lies with the individual states. That's where the sovereignty really does lie. And the only reason why we have a county of Lassen, just as we have any of the other 57 counties, is because the state legislature created us. It was 150 years ago, last April, that we celebrated the creation of Lassen County by the state of California. And Mr. Parker makes the point, and let me see if I can refresh what he said, because I think I want to give him further information. Where is it? I knew you were in here somewhere. Talking about our general fund and that we're spending 85% of our time doing what the state of California wants, and we do their bidding. It's kind of sad. And you're right, it is kind of sad. But counties were actually established for the purposes of doing the, you might say, the grunt work for the states that created them, not just here in California, but all 5,000 and some odd counties nationwide. It kind of came out of the English system from the medieval eras, and you remember the story of Robin Hood and the sheriff of Nottingham. It was the sheriffs and the legal authorities. Counties were created by the English system back in the 1200s. And our job is to carry the buckets of water and to do the work for the state of California. And it's not pleasant work at times when you are basically maltreated like we were with ERAF in 91, 92 with Wilson and Willie Brown stealing our property tax monies. But, you know, they have a legal license to abuse us however they choose. And that's the nature of the politics. And so one thing that is possible if we proceed with the kind of declarations combined together these counties, and I think this is part of the repercussions that we felt after the 91-92 effort, is that, you know, somebody down there says, you know, we've been talking about regionalizing government for a long time. If counties are so unhappy with their lot in life and the way we treat them, then why not we just abolish a bunch of them and consolidate them? I can tell you today, the four poorest counties on the financial spreadsheet, Alpine, Sierra, Modoc, and Trinity, population-wise, 2,000 in Alpine, 4,000 in Sierra, 10,000 in Modoc and Trinity. If they were trying to form a county today, we haven't seen a county created since 1908. If they were trying to form a county today, that they would not be allowed to become a county because they are not economically viable to sustain the services that counties are expected to handle for the state of California. So right off the bat, I can see those four counties being basically annexed to or merged back into some of the neighboring counties to provide services. You know, last November at the county's conference in Anaheim that I had the opportunity to attend and represent this board, you know, the supervisors from Trinity County, when they get up and talk at the mic, they would say, you know, we'd like to thank our friends in Orange County for giving us the money to be able to operate at a basic level. And they do it openly with a straight face. And the Orange County supervisor, who's a good buddy of Mr. Egan, he would start off his conversation by saying, you know, I want to thank my good friends in Trinity County for spending the money that we sent them wisely. So there's an open acknowledgement, even amongst the county circles, the disparity that exists in the allocation and use of the resources. So those are the realities that we're going to have to deal with, and this declaration could easily lead to that. But, Mr. Chairman, I'm of the opinion that if we're going to do anything, we need to do something to unite on the Reynolds versus Sims and bypass all this other stuff, because the Article 4, Section 3 is not going to work to the benefit of our constituents. Financially, it would, given the layout that we have here, would not be financially feasible for us. Lassen County, I'll close it with that. Under the model, we have the abstract that you submitted in our packet, and I know it's about midway through the packet for those who have a copy and want to look. But it shows that the federal income tax return, that's the 85% going to the county at a selected rate of 88%, amounts to $893,807, And when you take that out of the dynamics, instead of having a $59,322,711 surplus, we actually would wind up with a $54,571,096 deficit as it relates to Lassen County, because those federal dollars are not available to fund the services that would be of interest to the county. Now, it's offset. We do get PILT money. This last year, Congress appropriated $1,798,239. But as of January, the PILT monies for 2015 have only been appropriated at half that level. But regardless of whether we get half or we get full, we're still going to be close to $53 million short. So economically, it's not a bed of roses as projected. And the last thing on that chart, when it comes to those federal allocations, we use, again, the population that comes out of the census. And just as we had the issue with the mental health report earlier this morning, out of the 33,568 people that are in Lassen County that you generate this $113 million in taxes, you have to eliminate 10,000 inmates. You have to eliminate all the underage children, and that probably gets your taxpaying group down to probably in the neighborhood of about 12,000 in Lassen County. And there's a fair number of those that don't earn enough income to pay taxes. So really the burden of supporting the system really falls on the shoulders of about 7,000 or 8,000 people in our county, not 33,000 that the abstract indicates. So those are just some of the points. I could go on for another hour or two. And people like to make fun of that, but I studied my history. I know what I'm talking about, and all I can say is the Declaration in its present form doesn't serve well the folks in our community. And I've had a lot of folks in the community, not the ones in the room, but in the community, share with me their concerns and just outright opposition to it. And I think the best way to settle it would be ultimately, if we do proceed, is to have, I like the idea, Jeff, that you raised, that whatever action, if the board takes an action, would be submitted to an eventual vote of the people to either ratify and support and continue or to pull out. But I think it's a waste of time, and I think what we need to focus our time on is Reynolds versus Sims, and I think Mr. Baird has a great plan to pursue that.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to mention for the board's benefit, as you know, Supervisor Hammond is not in attendance today. He asked that the board consider if there's no urgency, and I'm not aware of any, there's no urgency of action, that the board wait until the next meeting when he would be there to vote on the issues, just for consideration.
Oh, unlike Jim a little bit, I did the math on their budget, and I had some questions about the gasoline taxes. The math did come out for me on that part, so maybe that's something else to be looked at too, as long as it's the federal income tax. What's the question on gas? Well, it doesn't come out. I got all these here come out, but I couldn't get the gasoline with what information was provided. I couldn't come up with the one. But that was, maybe my calculator didn't work quite right. And then, of course, on the other page, your declaration on the second whereas, you talk about the illegal fire tax. The other thing that's coming up is the State Water Resource Control Board on what they're doing for us. You got the irrigated lands management, and now they're coming out with GRAF, and they're coming out with groundwater. Those are all three things that you have to prove your innocence. You're not innocent until proven guilty. You have to pay money to prove your innocence, and that's having a direct and very hard impact, especially up in the Big Valley area. We were just put on the medium priority basin, so that's another big groundwater issue. So anyway, that's just something else. I think we do need to be at the table on this to show our support, so we have standing in this movement to get it forward. I think we should get on that, and I agree with Jeff, we need to get on it, but then we need to go to put it on the vote for the people to decide. And that brings up another question. In years past, what's going to be what's the term of this? declaration? Is it going to be 1 year, is it 2 years? Because we've had these votes in Lassen County before on these different movements. I mean, would those suffice for what we're trying to do today, or do we have to have another one?
Well, actually, that's a very good question. We haven't researched the prior resolutions or declarations that the board's made in the past, and perhaps there is one that's already been.
Well, the June 92 vote, the board passed, put that on the ballot, I want to say it was in the fall of 91 when they were dealing with the budget vote that started the whole thing. Before their own Tea Party at the time, long before there was ever another Tea Party created. And the three votes that took place was the 51st state, which was the common vote with the other 30 counties. There was a second question put on to annex ourselves to Nevada, detach from California and annex to Nevada and become Lassen County, Nevada. And then the third vote was to resurrect at that time the 1941 effort with Jefferson State with the Southern Oregon counties. And the voters in Lassen County voted 76% in favor of the 51st state model. The closer you got to the Oregon border, the more popular it was. They rejected 55 to 45 annexing to Nevada. But at that time was when we were dealing with Fish Springs and Washoe Valley, Washoe County trying to steal our water from the Honey Lake Basin. So the voters made it real clear they wanted nothing to do with Nevada. And the Jefferson State question, which was kind of a historic, rhetorical question, passed with 58% of the vote. So it was about 20 points less than the 51st state question for the rest of the counties. But that was the vote. I think the context, the information that vote was based on had really no relevance to the stuff that we've been basically dealing with, or even contemplating Reynolds versus Sims, because I don't think those two Supreme Court cases that Mark refers to was even played out yet at that time. Had that been something that's an option, I think it could have had a major impact on that whole movement.
I think understood Supervisor Alba's question to be what actions the board of supervisors have taken maybe in the form of resolutions historically that would suffice for this, or how long this action might remain in effect. Is that right?
Yeah.
Any other comments?
That's all I have.
Well, this is, like our county council said, this is a completely political statement we're going to make here today. It's worth what it's written on this paper is what it's going to cost us if we pass this today. I am in agreement that with Mr. Chapman, Reynolds versus Sims needs to be pursued. I think that's the ultimate goal. I think we should use the state of Jefferson as the vehicle to get there, though. It's my opinion. I don't think we can rally the rest of the counties in the north, not only the north state, but statewide to get in behind this. It's like I told you, Mr. Baird, I'm a realist. Do I believe we can have a 51st state? Highly unlikely in today's political world. But I do believe we can all get senators in each county, and that would change politics in California tremendously. If every state, every county in the state had a seat at the table in Sacramento, things would change. I do believe things would change tremendously. I don't think we need to, I'm sure the devil's in the details. We can dig in this and pick through it and say it's going to pass, it's not good. But I think we need to get in this car, if you will, Jefferson State, to push Reynolds versus Sims and go from there.
Okay,
And I move that the Lassen County Board of Supervisors today, because as history is dictated, we do not like California. So I move that we write up a declaration and put it on further discussion, if you will, to put it on a general election next year, if it's still a topic, to advise the board on the results of that. Does that make sense?
I'm unclear.
We passed today to sign the declaration, to have a seat at the table. Pending a general election vote in 2016
With the June primary.
of the June primary, wherever it costs the least to everybody in here, because it's going to cost us money to have the special election be $60,000.
Who, do you propose the county pay for that?
The election,
The cost of
running on the general election,
Yes, sir.
I believe we need to have that discussion in the future.
The board paid for the 3 votes in 92.
Understood.
Yeah, that's.
Just asking the question.
Yeah, but I mean, let's have that discussion, say January.
So is there a motion, and do I understand, Mr. Supervisor, that you're making a motion at this time to adopt the petition and
I am making a
declaration?
motion to adopt the petition.
Okay.
This petition
Yes. Well, we need to advise staff to adopt this. I think we need to do a little bit of wordsmithing on there. I think we need to emphasize, Reynolds versus Sims in there at some point in time.
So I need to make sure that, if Supervisor Hemphill's recommendation is to make changes to the language of the petition and declaration that is part of your packet, certainly happy to do that with an eye toward narrowing the language to focus on an effort to overturn Reynolds versus Sims. Happy to do that. I think that probably the best process there would be to send it back to staff for that purpose without necessarily a motion to adopt right now, and wait until we come back with the language and present that to you, sir, and the remainder of the board for consideration on adoption.
And that gives Mr. Hinman a chance to be
Yeah,
there.
that would, yeah.
Certain.
So I guess my motion is to table the vote, but to direct staff to bring us back a petition that encourages Reynolds versus Sims.
If that's the direction of the board, certainly happy to do it.
In that motion intent, there's a couple of references to the people of Lassen.
Right.
And I think that needs to be changed to some of the citizens of Lassen County or all the citizens of Lassen County. But if it goes to a vote of the people eventually, that's who's really speaking.
Is there a second to that motion? You got a second? All right, any more discussion on the board?
State the motion again.
I table a vote today and direct staff to bring us back a petition with an emphasis on repealing Reynolds versus Sims and changing some of the verbiage in here where to Supervisor Chapman is,
Understood. And so, is it the desire of the board that in the language focusing on an effort to overturn Reynolds versus Sims that we kind of clearly identify what efforts we would make? That is to say that the county would, acting on its own, petition for certiorari to the United States Supreme Court or institute legal action. Or I'm looking, do we want to clarify that or leave it vague, or what's the board's pleasure?
Well, you've always wanted to include before the Supreme Court.
Well, I think you probably want to direct it.
Okay.
Within those changes in the second whereas, I'd like to be very interested in adding the state water resources control board with the irrigated land management draft and the new groundwater.
Okay.
And
State water resource control board with their implementation of the irrigated land management